everybody. The last time I was on a stage was in DC last week at the White House. It was 97 degrees, so it is cold. I'm cold right now. For some of you huskier guys out there in three-piece suits, I know this is the temperature you signed up for, but not me. All right, I'm supposed to be talking about artificial intelligence because of the passion of the congressman. I've been trimmed down to 22 minutes, so I've had to cut out all the dirty limericks. We'll see, but I have a session later, a breakout or a working group or, you know, the kind of names of these things. If you have specific questions, come chat with me. I'm genuinely happy to talk about this. I've been working in the space of artificial intelligence and human development for 25 years. My very first project I ever did with $5 million from the CIA was to analyze people's facial expressions to tell if they were lying or not. This was my undergraduate honors thesis. And I got hooked, not with the spook stuff, but I got hooked on the idea that something so fundamentally human as a smile. In fact, my thesis specifically was the difference between what's called a Duchenne and a non-Duchenne smile, a real and a fake smile. It's in your supraorbital muscles, by the crinkle around your eyes. That a machine could not understand this. We'll talk about what they understand. But at least it could reveal this, something about ourselves, just through a set of equations that I, by hand, put into a computer. Over the years, I've had the chance to start companies, some of them in the education space, some looking at hiring and the future of work, and some, as was just alluded to, we've developed the first ever biological test for postpartum depression. Any of you who have ever struggled with it, it literally is not just in your head. We can see it in your epigenome, and that would be impossible without AI, without machine learning to help us recognize this. I built systems to reunite orphan refugees with their extended family members, and to treat my own son's diabetes. I believe in what technology can do if we choose to use it in a positive way. But it is just a tool. It isn't good or bad. Whatever the promise is, and I'm sure there are many, many people approaching your schools and selling technology and all the amazing things it will do, we'll take a moment, few minutes here, about 15, I'm gonna guess, to talk about what it's actually capable of and what remains fundamentally human. So let's start with what I think is an incredibly important question, a question you might never hear in a typical talk about artificial intelligence, and yet one which is fundamental to understanding the difference between the human and the machine. Are you happy? Now, it's a relatively well-lit room. I could see a few of you nod as I asked, but let's be a little bit more nuanced. If you weren't happy, what would you do about it? I bet many of us in this room have had challenges. We've come through them. We've figured out ourselves. Others might still be struggling with that, even here. Many of your students surely are struggling with this. But there's an interesting reality. A lot of what my work is about is, as a nerdy, hard number scientist, how do I measure the things that are predictive of positive long-term life outcomes? And I don't want to pick one outcome. Absolutely all-cause mortality, insulin sensitivity, central body mass. How many friends do you have? Are you happy? How far are you in your education? Lifetime income, lifetime wealth. Pick anything we might want to be true about ourselves as we enter old age or have already done so, and what are the things about someone you can measure that are causally related with those outcomes and are changeable. Those are the things that interest me. That's where I want to make a difference in the world. And so I've built this career around measuring these things, and one of the quirky things is that intelligence predicts all sorts of outcomes. Intelligence predicts how much money you'll make. Intelligence predicts academic success. Predicts all sorts of things. But it turns out there's essentially no correlation with happiness, which is really quirky. You'd think smart people would be able to answer my question of, if I'm unhappy, what should I do about it? And yet, all of this research fails to find that. Interesting enough, other things do. Lifetime meaningfulness, sense of purpose, these are huge predictors of all outcomes, including happiness. Why isn't intelligence one of the most critical factors in academic outcomes, not predictive of happiness? Well, maybe it's the way we measure intelligence. So when I want to measure someone's intelligence, I normally do it with what we're going to call well-posed questions. Questions that have explicitly right and wrong answers. I can do this by having people memorize lots of things and reproduce that. I can give them sort of brain teasers, but these have right and wrong answers. There's even abstract measures like Raven's progressive matrices. But again, there are right and there are wrong answers. Maybe life isn't a well-posed question. Life is an ill-posed question. How can I be happy? Different than you? Different than you? How can I be happy right now? Very different than when I was a kid. Boy, did I struggle with that when I was younger. Well-posed questions, ill-posed questions. We unfortunately have decided to define intelligence and a whole lot of academic success based on our ability to answer well-posed questions, which I'm going to be kind of honest, in 25 years of being so absurd that I call myself a professional mad scientist, I have never been given a well-posed question to solve. Never. They're completely uninteresting to me. I get questions like, Dr. Ming, my daughter has 500 seizures a day. Please save her life. Let me be clear. Nobody comes to the professional mad scientist first. So whatever the obvious answer is, clearly isn't true, or they wouldn't have asked me. A kid actually just across the Charles River, Dr. Ming, my son can't enter REM sleep. So I don't know how many of you might happen to know something about REM sleep, but the most amazing thing about that statement isn't that that occasionally happens, it does, but that the kid is still alive. It's like 5 people in the whole world. It's like an episode of House. It is impossible for it to be a well-posed question. It's a total mystery what's going on. Dr. Ming, we do everything the World Bank says. The kids in our countries, their test scores, their PISA scores go up year after year, and still no one wants to hire our citizens. What should we do about it? Dr. Ming, we know we have bias in our promotion process at our big, famous multinational company. Help us build an economic model that can measure that bias. It's not like we promote bad people. We just believe we can promote better people if we were more inclusive. So I get these questions that have to get solved. Forget perfect data sets and right answers. We don't even know what the right questions are. This is what's interesting. This is what we want a generation of kids to be able to solve. Now, this has probably always been true. But now there's this new technology in the world, artificial intelligence. What is it? How does it work? The math doesn't matter. It changes month by month. Maybe we could just say, think of any brief, complex human judgment, and it can now be made faster, cheaper, and increasingly better than a human can make it. But there's an important note to that. AI is fundamentally about well-posed questions. This is the very nature of how we build it. We give it an example of something, and we give it the right answer. And an example and the right answer. An example and the right answer. Trillions and trillions of examples and right answers. So when you think about GPT, the massive large language models, we're talking about trillions and trillions of cases where we've given you a string of words, predict the next word. There's an explicitly right answer. There is a next word. He stood astride the world like a colossus. You could have put another word in there, but it wouldn't have been right. And we give it feedback, and we tell it what it got wrong. We now live in a world where humans are no longer the superlative at well-posed questions, period. There's some nuance there, but Gemini, Google's version, GPT can pass every state's bar exam. It can pass the medical licensing exams in every state. It can, a really cool recent paper looked at giving it contracts to read and compared its performance against the actual lawyers that would have been doing the contract analysis and found it was equitable. Except it wasn't equitable because the lawyers, the human lawyers, took a couple of hours to read each contract, and GPT took 5 seconds. And when you ran the math, it turned out for the same quality of answering well-posed questions, GPT cost 99.97% less. That's not a great story for the future of humanity. If you think your job is to teach your students to answer well-posed questions. And I know you don't believe that that's true, and yet it's how we've set up the whole system. Not unique to America. This is true around the world. America comes somewhere at best in the middle in testing culture. There are other places that are just nuts about it. But we keep trying to build these well-posed examples for us to solve. We need to release that. We need to build a generation of kids to explore the unknown. We should always have been doing it, but I'm telling you, now, there will be very little else left. That might sound terrifying. That might sound like the common refrain you might be hearing about maybe AI is going to take all the jobs and we'll be left for the rest of us. Actually, I want to turn that around. Yes, we need to take this seriously. Yes, we need to be realistic about what will be there for the next generation. When we look at, this will be a little nerdy here, when we look at the change in labor demand over the last 20 years, prior to that, in the 50s and 60s, it was this wonderful ladder. Demand went up with skill level. So every step of the ladder, if you just did a little more education and put in a little more effort, there was a better paying job, higher in demand, waiting for you at the next level. Now it's a big U. All of the growth in demand, massive growth, are at the two extremes. Elder care, dishwashing. Elder care shouldn't be at an extreme, but let's be honest with ourselves. All of these notionally low skill, but boy, explosive demand. And at the far end, the most elite jobs, huge growth in demand. And in between, everything in between, demand is going negative. It isn't that those jobs are going away. We call this deprofessionalization. A job that could have been done by someone with a certain level of education before, it needed a university degree, it needed a certain set of skills. Now I can look at the next group down. I didn't do quite as well in school. Pair them with an AI, and they can do the job. And there are more of them, and they have lower labor power. And so it creates this constant downward pressure. But there's another pressure going in the other direction. Creative complementarity. We have routine labor, and we have creative labor. And creative is all about that exploration of the unknown. It's what my job for 25 years has been. Here's a crazy problem no one's ever worked on before. Please try to help. Which I have to say is the best job in the whole world. It better be, because it costs me about $1 million a year to do it. People bring me challenging problems, and if I think my team and I can help, I pay for everything. And whatever we invent, we give away. Occasionally, we invent something like the first ever biological test for postpartum depression, and that turns out has its own legs out in the world, but that's never how it starts. It starts because there's a question that demands an answer, and we have to do something about it. And I have the privileged ability to be able to help. What would it mean for a generation of kids to be able to explore the unknown? So this is the human side of the question. What about the AI side? Particularly in what you're doing. Sam Altman went out in front of Congress, you know, the guy Newsweek called the father of AI, who, as far as I know, has never built an AI model in his whole life. He said, imagine a future in which there is an AI tutor for every kid. It's interesting that he used the word imagine, because I don't have to imagine. Education is one of the few spaces where AI research has been going on for decades. In fact, it's shocking to me that the CEO and face of the most prominent AI organization in the world doesn't seem to know this. I'll tell you what happens if every kid gets GPT as a tutor. It gives them the answers, and then they never learn anything. Yeah. Not because AI doesn't have a role in education. I've worked in many spaces here, but this is actually one of the most robust findings. You take a bunch of students, you have a control group, you have one where the AI will give them answers, you have one where they have to generate their own answers first, but eventually it will give them answers. And then you have a last group that's just annoying. It's sort of Socrates, it just gives context. Well, you can probably guess, only the Socratic AI actually outperforms the control group. And in fact, in the other two groups of students that got answers from their AIs, they literally learned nothing. Would this generalize to all students? No, actually. But let's go with the Pareto rule, 80-20. But I'm going to be a little bit more honest. We're going to call it 95-5, maybe 99-1. There is a group of students that, given free rein to explore, will do amazing things. What's interesting is probably not violating the expectations of this room, but most people's room. They pretty much cut across the socioeconomic world. Yeah, there's an advantage for kids with wealthier parents that have been sort of enculturated in a more exploratory vein, but you see kids across all regions and all stripes exploring and doing creative things with the world that they are given. But most kids don't. So with my limited remaining time, I want to say the following about technology. This is a rule that I've had for a long time, and I'm hopefully sharing this as a way to make decisions for your own programs about what sorts of technologies should we bring in-house and make use of. Technology is a tool. Let me be super clear, particularly large language models. They know everything. They know everything. You have that for free in your pocket. they understand nothing. Never in a million years would I let Claude or GPT or Gemini write anything for me. Actually, shockingly, I was here in Boston just a few weeks ago. I won't name the company, but I was give a talk at their internal retreat, and just before my session, they talked about advice for their senior leadership about how to make use of this new GPT contract they'd signed. And their number one and number two uses were save time by having it read and summarize your emails, number one use. Save time by having it write your emails. And I thought, you've got to be fucking kidding me. That's crazy. That's literally a scene out of the movie Brazil for the nerds in the house where he sticks the pneumatic tubes, the inbox and the outbox, and the whole system explodes. I think the lesson is stop writing these crappy emails. I was at a loss, but you actually look at the research, even amongst elite companies, what you find is the people that overwhelmingly benefit from these little things like large language models are lower experienced individuals with fewer skills. So in other words, the people that are benefiting from it are the ones that are still learning how to do their job. Well, what did I just say about what happens when AI gives you the answers? Now we're not just talking about your students, we're talking about the next generation of workers never learning how to explore, never learning how to make a decision. Technology must challenge us. You gotta stop thinking that the purpose of technology is efficiency. Let it do all the boring stuff so that I can now work on the amazing. That's the AI bait and switch. It's not an untrue statement, but the reality is that approach slowly consumes everything, and we're left doing nothing. Here's an example of the test I want you to think through as you buy technology. I wrote a tweet years ago. It became, I think, my most shared thing. In 20 or 30 years, we will have a substantial increase in early onset dementia. And it will be directly, causally related to the use of Google Maps. Why? Because navigating through space is one of the things we know is prophylactic against cognitive decline. Think about where you go every day. Put actual thought into it. It is genuinely healthy, and now we don't have to. And in the years since, the research has actually come in, and we're seeing the earliest evidence of this. I'm better when I use Google Maps or Waze or whatever your favorite one is. We are genuinely better when we're using it. Are you better than where you started when you turn it off again? That's what we need. We need technology that challenges us. I said I'd never let these systems write anything for me. Here's how I use them, because I write a lot. GPT, you are my worst enemy. You are my nemesis. You have dogged me my entire career, found every flaw in my research, poked holes in everything I've ever published. Here's my new book chapter. Find all the flaws and explain to me why I'm wrong. I'm not looking for it to make my life easier. I want it to make my life harder. I want to be a better person. And this is what I'm aiming for. We call this productive friction. Lean into that. Build a generation of kids that lean into that. I'm all out of time. If you have specific questions, again, come figure out what my workshop or seminar, and I'm happy to get into them in detail. But if I can just leave you with one idea that I truly want you to understand, it's that AI can genuinely make for a better world. it can play a positive role in our lives. But in the end, it's not better AI, it's better people. That's what your job is. That's what everybody's job is. You're just the ones getting paid, not great, for. That's what we need, an entire generation of explorers. That should be our ambition, because the wonderful truth here is that the space of things we already know, though huge, and has been the foundation of our economy for hundreds of years, it's finite. The space of the unknown, however terrifying it may be to think that's what you have to master, it's infinite. What an amazing thing to give your students is the ability to explore that infinity and to give society, because that is what we desperately need right now, is people who want to actively go out and occasionally prove themselves wrong. All right, I'm going to take a little pause here and go backstage, and they're going to take me to some room someplace where there I can wax poetic again. But thank you all so much for your time. I really enjoyed being out here with you. Thank you all.